Hi guys, welcome to our fifth video on the Rive channel. Today we are actually going to be looking at the Rive Workspace interface. It's very important that we go through the entire workspace to be able to know what is what and what the different part of the workspace is. Now in this video, I'm not going to be going in depth to, for instance, what all the contents of the file menu. I'm just going to show you every part of the workspace, and from the next video we are actually going to be going through every single feature that is actually found within the workspace, menu by menu, feature by feature. So let's get started. Alright guys, so let's continue. So the first thing we need to do is we're actually currently on the Rive home page. We click on new file. So the first thing you see on your screen every time in Rive is actually this opportunity to, for lack of a better word, to decide which preset you're going to make by clicking on select preset. You can choose for whichever app, phone you're designing for, and whether you're designing for A4 or LinkedIn cover or triple shot or whatever. All right, so that said, if none of this actually piques your interest, you can actually decide to set the width yourself. For instance, you can see I can change this to 1000 by 1000. All right, so just for the sake of demonstrating that, I'm just going to create an artboard now. So we have an artboard that is 1000 by 1000. All right, so the next thing you see as per the interface of this workspace area is actually to now, so it's very important to differentiate what I call workspace and what Rive calls workspace. So what Rive calls workspace is this workspace where certain personal files are saved. However, my own usage of the workspace now, it's actually for this place where your work is actually done, like where you have your canvas, your artboard. So that said, I believe that's so important. Moving on, the first thing you see is actually your title bar, and in your title bar, you actually see the title of your work. And you can double click on that to rename your file. So let's say you want to save this as tutorial. I'm not going to start with a capital letter because tutorial, then that's what you have. It's actually currently saved. Rive doesn't currently have that feature where, at the start where you're creating a preset, you can actually directly name your file. So it's always very important that you rename your file almost instantly. Top right, you also see the beta version, the version of the Rive app that you're using. Beside it, you have this arrow pointing downwards where you can learn more about Rive, show your license, or check for update. So the rest, you know this, right? The control buttons. All right. So below that is what you have is actually supposed to be your control bar. Your control bar, but don't know why in the documentation they wrote two bar, which is actually quite bad. So it's actually your control bar because, but I guess they should be confused because the control bar actually contains menus as well as tools for them, and with a bunch of buttons, other buttons doesn't do that doesn't perform any that they perform action, but they don't function as tools. So I would was really surprising seeing them name it the toolbar in the Drive documentation. But I think a more wholesome description of the next bar is actually like a control bar. So because it actually contains menus as well as tools as well as certain other buttons that perform different actions. So the first thing on what I'm going to actually call the control bar, right? Because it's two bar, is actually this file menu where you actually have a bunch of things that you can actually do directly from the file menu. So that's why I'm actually going to get into that in other videos where I'm going to look at every single feature and we're going to see what exactly are they used for. So moving on, directly beside it is what we call the select tool and its menu. The select tool just allows you to select whatever object you're actually working on, including your artboard. All right, so that noted, you can access other tools by coming to click on this arrow that points downwards, where you can choose translate, rotate, scale, etc. Or for this other one, you could choose for the tool beside, which is actually like the outboard tool. You have a bunch of other tools that are also very important as well. We will get into them in other videos. Directly beside this is the component tool, where you can select your or create components, etc. Then the draw tools, pen tool, you can use this a bunch of tools to actually create almost anything. I'm just going to quickly go over all this because that's not my real aim. My real aim is to just show you the entirety of the software and break down every other button or feature in its own video. So that's it. That's so important. Then the next thing you actually have is this your text tool. When you select your text tool, you can actually create any text that you want by either clicking directly on the artboard or clicking and dragging, which is quite interesting to note that once you use your text tool once, it actually automatically switches back to the select tool. Don't know why, but that's how it's currently working. So you have the bone set of tools. Click on the down arrow, you have this bone and the bone width for then you have events and set of tools, joystick property group, effect group. This is probably one of the most important set of tools you actually have within Rive. Then you have the scripting tools, where you can actually create whatever script you want. In future tutorials, we're actually going to be going over scripts. Scripts are just basically to create certain things that you're unable to create normally using what we actually have. If you have been used to After Effects, Illustrator, you find out that there's some certain things you can't do within the normal Adobe Illustrator interface, so you need scripts to actually do that. So Rive is giving every single user the ability to be able to do scripting for some features that Rive doesn't actually yet have, so you can actually directly code them into your personal project. So this is actually great. Whilst this is great for people who are actually free users, it actually has a lot of limitations as it stands. We'll get into that by the time we actually want to actually talk about scripting in Rive. All right, so moving on from there, we actually have this play icon that actually allows you to play whatever state machine you have for whatever artboard. It's so useful because you can directly select whichever artboard and whichever state machine you want to play. Now, it's very important to know that within Rive, each artboard actually has their own state machine as well as their own timeline. So let's say, for instance, for this particular one now, it has its own state machine 1 and timeline 1. So let's say, for instance, I try to create a new artboard. So I just did that by selecting the artboard and dragging this, pressing Alt and dragging this. So let's say, for instance, in this same artboard, so I just choose to name this state machine X and timeline X. So notice that when I come here, you see state machine 1, timeline 1. When I go there, it's state machine X, timeline X. So two different state machines, two different timelines, in fact. So they are actually different, and of course you can link them together with what we actually call components, but we are not getting that in this video. All right, so it's very important. So with this play tool, you can actually play whichever state machine you want, for either for artboard 1, which is state machine 1, or for artboard 2, which is state machine X. So very important to actually note that. All right, so moving on your right is just your user whatever. It just shows you your user profile picture and a green circle. Doesn't do anything. Click on it, it doesn't open any link. So uh, you know It's what what it is. Directly beside it is this invite button for you to invite people to your project. I'm not going to do that in this project because I don't have anybody I want to invite. So next is publish. Publish is just more or less like export. We will get into that by the time we're actually exploring the file menu. So, for instance, you can export to .rv if you're actually passing your project down to a web developer. You can export to a library if you want to continually use that particular animation. There's what we call libraries. It's actually only available for pro users, so I can't actually demonstrate what it looks like to you in this particular video. To hosted link, let's say for instance you want to just share link with someone without having to directly send the person the .riv file. You can do that. You can also post to the marketplace. Of course, in this marketplace, you can, like Elendino, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, asking me a bunch of questions about the marketplace. So, marketplace is a place where you can post your works and directly, so people can have a direct access to your actual file and piece it apart, and to understand the work that you did. Very important that that Rive doesn't give people access to your own actual work, so they don't dissect your own; they dissect a copy of your project. If that actually makes sense. All right. So that said, directly beside it is what we call previewed bound values. This is very important, particularly when you're working on data using data binding. So let me show you something. So I made this collision test a while back. This is the actual position of this objects without the data binding affecting it. So data binding essentially affects whether your position, your scale, or whatever of your or whatever object you have actually created. But right now, because I have not hit play on the state machine, notice that when I hit play on the state machine, it's shifted to this right edge because at that point data binding is already affecting it. The x position and the y position is 0, but the actual position is actually 400 by 25. All right, so but if I want to know, let's say I don't want to hit play on my state machine, I want to know the actual position, what the data binding has already done to these objects without actually having to press this play button. So it really comes in handy is this preview bound values. So it just allows you to preview what just allows you to preview what has been done, like to see if your data binding is actually working correctly. In this case, it actually is. All right, so directly beside this is this design and animate tab. It's very important to note that the workspace we've been exploring so far is this design interface. You can switch to animate, which actually gives you more options, more animation options, right? Like your state machine, your timeline, as well as another inspector for this. I'll get in the inspector shortly. For instance, when you're in your state machine, let's say for instance you select a transition, you have all that things that you can now change, like your duration, allow exit during transition, and you can actually create events. These are things we are going to get into in later videos. I just want to show you around, so please bear with me. Move on from there. Of course, you can actually switch between both workspaces or both interfaces by pressing tab on your keyboard, or you can manually come to press design or animate. Now, the next thing we actually have, and I think I should go for, is our stage. Right, so I want to attack our stage first before going to our setup panels on our left, and this right here, which is actually called the inspector. All right, so then I'll briefly switch to animate mode, show you that you can actually create more state machines, etc. Video is getting longer already. So now next is our stage. Our stage contains artboard, so you can actually have pretty much artboard everywhere within your stage, right? So very important to know that our artboard is pretty much like boundless. So that's it. So on your right, you actually have the opportunity to Opportunity to zoom, you can see zoom in plus, zoom out minus, zoom to fit F, zoom to 100% control O. So let's say for instance, you zoom beyond your, or you move beyond your canvas of your artboard, and you want to immediately get back to your artboard. All you just need to do is press F, and it takes you to whichever artboard is actually active. You can press minus on your keyboard to zoom out, and press plus to zoom in. Very important, stuff. Of course, you can also hold spacebar on your keyboard and drag. Super useful stuff. When you press control and your mouse wheel, it also allows you to zoom in and zoom out. It's very important detail as well. So moving on from there, you have these three buttons that actually also still allows you to create scripts within for your work that you're making. Now, directly beside it is what we call the split editor, right? So this is actually going to keep splitting the editor, and it's very useful, particularly when you want to be doing two separate works at the same time, or doing two separate works. Let me give you an instance. Let's say for instance, I want to create a script. So I'll use another method to create a script aside from this button, this two here and this two here. And that's by coming to asset and clicking on plus. And I'm just going to choose scripts. I'm going to click on node. And let's say for instance, I am working on this node script and I'm already drawing something on my stage from the node script. Now it's going to be very stressful for me to be coming both ways to be checking what I'm building, right? So it's better to use this split. So by the time I split, I'm able to see what is going on both ends. So as you can already tell, you can actually maximize your screen by coming to the right bottom edge of your stage, if that makes sense. So directly underneath our stage is what should be our our status bar, but it's actually filled with some other options like console problems, changes, testing audio, etc. And the amount of milliseconds or seconds it takes to actually compile our code. We have this console that actually shows us. This is where, let's say for instance, you have any problems going to show. This is where if you print something from your code, this is where it's going to show. Like I can remember one time when I was just starting with scripting, and I was thinking that, oh yeah, I want my script to output the text on the artboard, and I didn't know that if you print something directly from for those who know code, this will make sense. If you print something from your script, it's going to be showing on the console, right? Not on the artboard. Rive doesn't currently support affecting text like with or creating text afresh from a node script. All right. No, that noted, you can actually come to problems where, let's say for instance, you have having a problem with on whatever line of your code is actually going to show you. It's already notify you here, so it's also going to show you here as well. Then changes, not going to talk about that in this video. Testing as well as audio for you to manage whatever audio sound you have going on for you. Next is this option where you can close the debug panel, and also this option where you can actually toggle presentation mode to full screen or otherwise. So I only need one, so I'm just going to close this, and I'm going to close that to zoom out. So that said, we have a proper understanding of that. Then on our left is the hierarchy panel where any objects we create is actually going to show. So let's say for instance you create a triangle, rectangle is going to show. You create circle is actually going to show as well. So when you create this circle, it shows, and depending on the hierarchy of the object, it's actually going to be displaying on top of the other. So let me try to change the color of our stuff so you can see. Let's say I make this red, you can see that it's actually consuming our rectangle. But if I drag this up and bring it up above the rectangle, it's now directly on top. Yeah, and so the rectangle is directly on top of our circle now. So because of the hierarchy, right? Of course, you can select your artboard and make changes to your artboard from this artboard option, yeah, etc. Right. So that said, it's very important to note that you can also search within your artboard. So let's say you're looking for your rectangle, because depending, you might actually have a bunch of files that, I mean, can have like up to 1,000 shapes or more within your artboard. So sometimes you might be looking for one particular layer, one particular shape or the other. And that's why it's best to name your files properly. So with your search, you can quickly search for whatever shape you're actually looking for. That said, tags is only available for pro users. We're not going to get into that. Then you have your asset panel where you can actually bring in whatever file you want outside of Rive that is supported by Rive into your workspace. So let's say, for instance, if you want an image, just select the image. If you want a font, just select the font. If you want a particular audio, you can actually bring it in. Moving on, this is the data panel where everything that you're doing within your data binding is actually going to show in this particular panel. So let's say, for instance, you have like a number that is being controlled, a number property, and you can keep adding more properties. You can add like a string and then keep adding more properties, you know, images. Oh, no. Alright, so for those who don't know what that is, we are actually going to get into that in other videos. It's just this tab that shows you everything you're working on related to data and how the different data you have is actually controlling whatever you're controlling it with in your artboard. Now, so don't overly stress yourself over all the information. Just try to listen and have the information somewhere. Chances are when you're learning, you just have a bunch of information that is eventually going to start making sense by the time you start seeing all the other parts. Right. Of course, you actually have these agents where you can directly code, design, or animate. Of course, it means you can actually provide it, specific instructions, and it's just going to help you do whatever you want with that. So it's more like vibe coding, right? So you can vibe code within Rive. Interesting. All right, so moving on is actually on our right, we actually have a context specific inspector. So your inspector, if you are coming from Adobe Illustrator, is more like your properties panels, where it's going to show you the properties of anything you select. So depending on whatever you select, your context is actually going to, your inspector is going to change. So let's say, for instance, I select my artboard. Notice that there are some set of tools that I had before that I no longer have now. So that is so important to note. Of course, you have new options like view model and the instance of the view model that you're actually binding to this specific artboard. So it's very important that you know that. We have different options for this rectangle. We have the layout selection and slide selection. We're going to get into that. You can actually change the color. You can add more color, etc. Whether you feel or a stroke. This is there you can do practically almost anything you want. So that's it. That's actually the inspector panel, general overview of the inspector panel. So also when you switch to animate mode, which is where I currently am in, you have like a smaller version of the inspector panel that is actually dedicated to your animation. So let's say, for instance, you click on timeline and you create, let's say, a simple movement. I'm just going to try to keyframe the exposition of this particular stuff, and I'm going to bring it here. So let's say, for instance, I select this too, You notice that it's giving me this interpolation option where I can affect how this shape moves from here to here, and so I can switch this to bicubic, which essentially means it's going to slow in or slow out, but I can then modify my graph to make it come in slowly and actually move out faster. Let's get to the animations tab. The animations tab, I actually have opportunities to do lots of stuff. For instance, you can actually go through, you can actually click on plus, and what it does is you can create new timelines. You can create as many timelines as you want. You can create as many state machines as you want by clicking on this plus button. Also, it's very important to know is that within state machine, you can hit play to play it. Also, you can keep adding more layers, right, to your state machine. So you can be performing one action here, and this action is going to be performing concurrently with whatever action is performing here. It's going to be performing concurrently with whatever is actually happening here. So you can have three actions going on at the same time using your state machines. Now, this is so powerful, but so I'll just go back to state machines. You can actually create new state machines. Of course, when you click on, so you can actually have multiple playing simultaneously. Quickly overview the timeline, so you can click on play, and then of course you can change whether you want one shot loop, ping pong, etc. We're actually going to delve into that in another video since this video is already too long already. Alright, so one last thing that I think is actually worthy of note, particularly in the latest edition of Rive, is actually that your listener and state machines have been moved from here. It's actually here before, it has actually now been moved to listeners and input. So you can actually click on listener to do that. See you in the next video where we're going to delve into the file menu and explain every single part of it.